Californians will be choosing a new governor in 2018. While some think the top two primary system will give us a governor's election between two Democrats, Republicans hope someone like our guest, John Cox, might break through and begin to turn around the fortunes of the Republican Party statewide. We'll ask him what he sees as the challenges and opportunities that await the next governor of California.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. Chevron's Coalinga oil field and Fresno County have been doing side by side for over 100 years. Learn more at doers.com. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. Governor Jerry Brown is termed out in 2018, so there's several people vying to replace him. Among them is our guest, Republican candidate for governor John Cox. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. Appreciate it.
So, people want to know, why do you want to be governor? What's your vision?
Well, you know, this state has become unaffordable with the worst business climate in the country, Mark, and that needs to change. I've lived here now for 10 years. My whole family has been in California for generations. They've watched this state descend from the Golden State to now being the worst in the nation in business climate. We're the #1 judicial hellhole. Our education system, which was once vaunted, is now one of the worst in the country. Our crime rate's going up. Our cost of living, the cost of housing, water, electricity, all among the highest in the country, to the point where California now is #1 in poverty, Mark. This is not the Golden State anymore.
Yeah. A lot of that's driven by housing costs, of course.
Yes, and we haven't even talked about doing anything about this pension bomb, a $1 trillion unfunded liability that's going to hit. We don't know if it's going to be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And the politicians in Sacramento who are all caught up in this special interest funding thing, you know, where they just listen to the special interests, they don't care about getting any of this done. As a matter of fact, they keep handing out things to the special interests. It's got to change, and I'm running for governor to change it.
Well, let me ask you this. You know, invariably, if you're elected governor, you're probably going to have to work with a democratically controlled legislature, Assembly and Senate, most likely.
For a time.
Well, they have a supermajority now. Most likely they're going to have at least a majority.
Until we replace them all.
Yeah, okay.
We'll talk about that.
Okay, fine. But how do you make your vision a reality in that context?
Well, you know, you obviously have to work with people. I've been a businessman for 40 years, Ken, or Mark, and I've worked with people of all stripes, and I've had to, because you have to do that in business. You know, you can't pick who your customers are, you know. And I've reasoned with people. I've dealt with people. I've advised people, and I've talked about the rationality of solutions. I'm a CPA. I'm a lawyer and an investment advisor, and so I had to advise people on solutions to a particular problem. Well, that's what government should be doing. Government should be addressing solutions, but nobody wants to do that because, frankly, again, it's the special interests don't want solutions. The special interests want the status quo to remain the same. They want things to stay the same because they're making money and doing well from the way that things are. The people out there are not doing well.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, what you're arguing is that politics should be rational. And maybe that's idealistic. Yes. And how practical is that? And so you're bringing a skill set that's, you know, rationally based, accounting, et cetera. Is that how you think you're going to be able to convince people, presenting them with the facts and convincing them that way?
Yeah, and I'm not going to be the only one. I mean, there's 19 states around the country now that have businessmen as governors, and I think there's a reason for that, Mark. I mean, I think people recognize that having a business person, you get solutions. You get solved these problems of education and transportation and housing and all these things. You know, most politicians are easy at blaming others. They're easy at shifting costs to the next generation or to taxpayers. They're not good at actually coming up with changes that actually direct themselves to improving things.
Well, let me ask
and
a question.
That's what I'm interested in.
Let me ask a question. You know, there's a big difference between the coastal areas and the inland areas of California.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
call it a tale of two states. What would you do to address those problems in inland California, whether it be San Bernardino, Fresno, Madera?
First thing we got to do is we got to realize we're all in this together. California isn't just Silicon Valley. It isn't just Hollywood. As a matter of fact, the agriculture industry is even more important than either of those two. It employs more people, it produces more GDP. We're the #1 state for dairy, for example. I mean, people don't know that. They think Wisconsin, where you went to school, Mark. But we've got to make sure that there's water storage. We've got to make sure that there's a business climate, that the regulations don't strangle business. I mean, we have got the worst regulatory environment in the country. I mean, business people all around the nation look at California and they laugh when they think about how business has to, comply with all this ridiculous regulation that comes out of Sacramento. We've got to get it to where people in the Central Valley especially can start new businesses, can grow their businesses, can continue to employ people and provide the resources we need.
Yeah, it's interesting you said about agriculture. It's from a GDP, it's not the largest in California, but in terms of practicality, people need to eat, so it is very significant.
It's significant for the world.
Yeah, we're going to talk about two other hot topics that are being discussed in state politics these days, affordable housing and providing an adequate infrastructure. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute, and we're talking to Republican candidate for Governor John Cox. Let's talk about some current issues that are being dealt with by the state. Sure. One big issue that's been talked about is affordable housing. Yeah. It seems like the basic question there is whether the government should kind of spend its way out of the problem with bonds or maybe tax credits, bring back the RDAs, or should the government focus on regulatory reform like amending CEQA to free private enterprise to kind of meet demand? What are your thoughts on that?
Reforming CEQA has to be #1. That's first thing. But we also make sure that we have a supply of homes, and we also have to make sure that we reduce the cost of developing. I mean, right now, developers tell me that they got to go through 6 agencies in order to get approvals, and the delays are incredible, and the lawyers' fees. And then there's the impact fees on all this. I mean, there's no reason why they have to go through all this. They tell me that before they turn over a spade full of dirt, they've already got $150,000, $200,000 in each unit. That's what's driving up the price, Mark. We need to have some more supply as well. We're going to have to extend populations into other areas and talk about transportation improvements that allow that to happen.
It's interesting you say that.
It's all part of the same thing.
The Altamont Corridor Pass Express that goes to Modesto, Merced up north, they're going to extend that into the Silicon Valley, which I think is going to exactly answer your question. We could see people living in the valley because they can afford a home there.
Yeah, and we got to make the transportation improvements so that they can get there.
Yeah, you don't want to be on the highway between Modesto and the Bay Area.
No,
that's a parking lot.
Sitting in traffic. I mean, it's the world's biggest parking lot. I know, I know. But that's all part of the same picture. But we also have to make sure that we get the right bang for our buck. We've got to get rid of the waste and corruption. Caltrans is one of the worst in terms of corruption and the spending. We've got to make sure that we get a full value for that, and I'm going to be talking about that during the course of the campaign.
Yeah, we're going to transition out of road. We're talking about roads and highways. There's this new transportation tax that was passed, $5.2 billion a year for the next 10 years. Was it necessary?
It had no reforms of Caltrans. Had no guarantee that it was going to be used for the roads.
It did say that they're going to try to save 100, which sounds like a lot, but it's $100 million savings in Caltrans. And when you talk about $5.2 billion, it's
a drop in the bucket.
Put it in context.
We added up. The state of California collects $22 billion a year that are directly related to motor vehicles and gasoline. Yet we've only been spending about $4 billion on roads, and we spend $4.50 for every dollar Texas spends on building a mile of road. So think about that. Texas is way, way more efficient with the use of their resources. The reason we're not efficient is because we don't use the private sector. We are way overstaffed at Caltrans, and again, a lot of that is special interest corruption.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, we both have some similarities here. We know a little bit about North County, San Diego. My mom lives down there. You're from there. And as you know, the 805 and the 5 down there, it's like a 12-lane highway.
It is.
Most times it's a parking lot.
There's some of the time.
A lot of gridlock. So is the answer to gridlock more lanes, highway lanes, or more transportation alternatives like mass transit or high-speed rail?
I think they all have a role, but it all relates back to being able to use our resources wisely, Mark. And so my mission as a businessman running for governor is to bring the best minds in to explore all the alternatives. But we have limited resources, Mark. That's the point. We can't keep taxing our way to prosperity. We've got to relieve the tax burden on people, which means we've got to get a more efficient use of our resources.
Well, let me ask you, you're not a fan of the $5.2 billion tax
Not at all.
for transportation. How would you address that problem? The LAO had a report that fraud, waste, and abuse at Caltrans, approximately $500 million. That's a lot of money, no question about it, but it's nowhere near the $5.2 billion or the money that they're going to need to fix California's highways, which they're talking about like $50 to $60 billion to fix the highways. Where would that money come from?
There's tons of it. The general budget's $125 billion a year. And what's the problem? The problem is that we're spending a lot of money on a lot of different areas that we shouldn't be, and very inefficiently. We've got to get rid of a lot of the programs that are just sinecures or way stations for union employees or for retired politicians.
Can you have any specific that you'd point to?
Oh, there's a whole ton of boards and commissions that are still in existence that pay outrageous salaries. And the other part of it is the pension bomb. I mean, we got to talk about that.
We will talk about that.
But pensions are crowding out all the spending that is needed for a lot of other services, transportation, but also social services, education, and that's only going to get worse if we don't address it.
We're going to talk about that, but I do want to fit this one last thing in because we've only got about 30 seconds left in the segment, but I want to talk about water. Obviously.
Got to have more storage.
So that's the question.
Reservoirs. We've been tearing down reservoirs instead of building them, and we haven't been taking care of the ones we have, and the reason is political corruption because environmental extremists have a control in Sacramento, and they are requiring these reservoirs to be torn down.
What is your position on the governor's $17 billion water fix in the Delta?
Another pork project for political contributors. It's a payoff for political contributors. I don't believe it's necessary if we build reservoirs that get the runoff from the mountains. I mean, let's face it. We had a record snowmelt in last winter, and that water should have been in storage now. Most of it's going into the Pacific. We've got to store it right where it's at.
Okay, so where does Republican gubernatorial candidate John Cox stand on some other perennial issues facing the state, like crime, poverty, jobs, and education? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with John Cox, Republican candidate running for governor in 2018. Let's talk about an issue that's always on people's minds. They might think that actually it's the most important thing government does, and that's public safety.
Absolutely.
So crime trends are generally down, but recently there's been an uptick.
Not in California.
Recently, there's been an uptick in some crime statistics. As a general trend, over 20, 30 years, they're down. But my question for you is this. That uptick, which is occurring in crime, is that a one-off anomaly, or is this the start of a trend?
Well, I hope it's a one-off anomaly, but I'm afraid that it's not. And one of the reasons is that, first of all, we've been reclassifying a lot of crimes down to misdemeanor. We've been letting
a lot of the drug crimes.
But not only the drug crimes, but really almost some violent crimes and some crimes that are really pretty dangerous. The other thing that we've been doing is we've been getting prisoners out of prison because we can't afford to keep them there. I mean, this is another thing that goes back to the budgetary issue. It all circles back, Mark, to the waste, to the special interest corruption in Sacramento. And why? Prison guards make humongous amounts of money.
They've been very effective.
They've been very effective at buying politicians and other government employees. I've gone to a website, one of my favorites now, although it raises my blood pressure, transparentcalifornia.com. You will see a dentist, prison dentist, making $700,000 a year. Prison psychiatrists clocking in at $450,000 a year in salary. And they get pensions based on these. I mean, the trouble is it costs $75,000 a year to house a prisoner in this state now. Well, of course, you're blowing the budget if you have too many prisoners. Well, I got to tell you, as you said, the role of government is to protect the people. If you're letting people out of prison, you're not doing that. The other part of it, obviously, too, the crime problem is our education system. We're not producing kids. You and I talked about it before the show began, about how a lot of our kids go into school. 40% of CSU students are in remedial education because they're not getting basic skills in our public schools. And why? Because the schools are run for the teachers' unions. They're not run for the parents. They've got to be run for the parents and the kids so that we get kids that are graduating that can actually succeed in this economy.
Let me tie into that with a PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California report that said that almost 4 in 10 Californians are living at or near poverty. And it's even higher in places like the San Joaquin Valley.
Right.
Indeed, California, we talked about this two-tier economy in the state. Unemployment rates in the Valley are twice as high as they are in the Bay Area. In fact, 8 of 10, this is a really interesting statistic, 8 of the 10 metro areas with the worst unemployment nationally are in California, and most of them are in the Valley.
Yeah.
So what can be done to correct this imbalance?
Two things. First of all, we got to bring down the cost of living. I mean, one reason people are in poverty is because they can't afford to live here anymore. The cost of housing, water, electricity, gasoline with the taxes that we pile on. But the other part of it is the lack of good education, too, because if we're not preparing people for the 21st century economy, they're not going to be able to get a job that's going to make enough of a living. I met with some business leaders here in Fresno this morning, and they were telling me they can't find qualified workers. They interview people, and they're just clearly unqualified. They can barely put sentences together. They can barely achieve any kind of
literacy. It's not a
literacy.
Fresno-specific issue. That's all around the state.
It's all around the state, and it's a real problem. We've got to have an economy that doesn't leave people behind like that. And I'm afraid this situation is only going to get worse and not better if we don't change things.
What specific educational reforms would you like to see?
I want to put the parents back in charge. I mean, Barack Obama sent his kids to a school he chose. Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton sent their kids sent Chelsea to a school that they chose. Why shouldn't every parent be able to choose a competitive school? And I'll tell you why.
Voucher?
Vouchers or tax credits. I don't care what you call it. The point is, the GI Bill, is a voucher program. Pell Grants are a voucher program. What you do is you set up competition. Competition is what improves everything. I mean, I'm in business. I compete with all my competitors. I wake up every day trying to be better. I want our teachers and our school administrators to wake up every day being better because they know if they aren't, their parents can walk and go to somewhere else.
So there's a few other things we could talk about. One is tenure and your feelings on tenure. The other thing we talk about is the Common Core and whether or not that was a good idea. Any comments on that?
First of all, education spending should be brought back to the local areas. I know in California we've had it move up to Sacramento for a large part, and of course because the people in Sacramento want to control everything. Local control.
Well, he who has the gold makes the rules.
Absolutely,
They have the money, so.
absolutely. So we've got to get more local control. But we've also got to get more good people to go into teaching. You know why young people tell me they don't go into teaching? Because they look at it as a union lockstep job. We have last in, first out, LIFO. I'm a CPA. LIFO is usually used for inventories,
right.
but when people get fired, the last in are usually the first out. What sense does that make? And why does a fourth grade teacher need tenure? They don't. We got to modify that system.
Okay, more with Republican gubernatorial candidate John Cox in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Republican gubernatorial candidate John Cox about some of the long-term issues he'd like to confront if elected governor of California. Let's talk about immigration. Big issue.
Yeah.
State has become a sanctuary state. I know these are really more federal issues, but what are your thoughts on immigration reform and sanctuary state status?
First of all, the sanctuary state thing is all about dividing people. I mean, the way that politicians raise money is they divide people and they get people angry or scared. And that's a problem, Mark, because we got to solve these problems. Now, the sanctuary state thing is basically violating the rule of law. The thing that separates America from Cuba or Venezuela or other countries that are failed states is the fact that we respect the rule of law. We're not governed by the rule of men. And this idea that the state of California is going to tell the federal government we're not going to cooperate and adhere to the rule of law is just wrong. It sends the wrong message. We've got to achieve solutions. We've got to reach across and get people to agree with us. And of course, people in Sacramento don't want that because they're raising tons of money making Donald Trump the enemy of all things real, and you can see it in their fundraising and their partisanship. I want to get money out of politics, Mark. We've got a situation where we've got the best legislature money can buy, and the voters know it. The state legislature is just a bunch of professional fundraisers. And as you might know, I'm sponsoring a ballot initiative to try to change that.
Okay, another big issue. I'm just going to throw big issue after big issue at you.
Sure.
Healthcare, really big issue. How do we improve healthcare in California?
Not by making the government the payer of all healthcare, which is what my opponents on the Democratic side want to do. Healthcare is like any service, Mark. It's like plumbing, it's like food production, it's like anything. If it's competitive in a free market, the cost comes down and the quality goes up. Look at LASIK. LASIK costs have come way down. The quality has been great and gotten better. That could be the case with healthcare if it was really a competitive market.
So you like the idea of selling insurance across state lines?
Selling insurance across state lines. We ought to have way more insurance companies offering service. We ought to have way more clinics. We ought to let nurses do a lot of other tasks that doctors, like to keep for themselves. More competition. But again, the trouble is that a lot of these sources, the hospital associations, the insurance companies, the nurses, they all buy politicians to protect their livelihoods. They want no competition. Well, competition's a good thing. Monopolies are a bad thing. And that's why we've got to change the equation in Sacramento.
Let's throw another issue at you, climate change. First of all, do you agree that it's being produced by man-made actions? Number one, and second, if you do, what actions should we take to address it?
I'm from Chicago. The climate's always changing. The expression there is, if you don't like the weather today, just wait 24 hours, it'll change. Listen, I'm not able to say one way or the other. I don't like pollution. I want to see pollution end. I want to see technology on the internal combustion engine to reduce emissions. I drive a Tesla. I'm happy to be doing that. I like to go to more natural gas. The cleanest fuel source is nuclear power, and we've demonized that. France produces just about all their electricity from nuclear power.
It's interesting. It's not part of the renewable energy equation in California. They've excluded large hydro and nuclear from that equation. It's just interesting.
Which is nuts. And why? I'll guarantee you it's because the solar panel people are buying a bunch of politicians, as well as the wind turbine people. Have you ever driven through the desert near Palm Springs and seen all those turbines that are all subsidized, by the way, by the taxpayers?
I'm hearing a theme here.
Yes.
And the theme I'm hearing is you're very concerned about political corruption.
It affects every part of our life. It affects all the costs of living in this state. It affects the electricity, the water.
Well, what's your solution? You were talking about this neighborhood district reform. Explain that a little bit.
Well, first of all, everybody knows that Sacramento is owned by these corrupt special interests. And the reason it's the case is because California has the same number of assemblymen and senators it's had since it was founded.
That's amazing.
We had 800,000 people when the Constitution of California was drafted originally.
And now we're approaching 40 million.
We're approaching 40 million. The number's the same. So senator...
Just think about that for a second. It's 40 times larger, more than 40 times larger, and we have the same number of elected representatives.
So a state senator represents 1 million people. That's bigger than a lot of states. Mm-hmm. And so the special interests control because they supply all the money for these campaigns. The neighborhood legislature subdivides these big districts into tiny ones. So the campaigns have to be done door to door, neighbor to neighbor, talking to people like I'm talking to you. People can spend a lot of money, but it can be competed against by people just going door to door. This method's been used in New Hampshire for 150 years. People in New Hampshire like their legislature. In California, most of the legislature is rated very, very low.
It was rated very low. It's actually gone up.
Slightly.
It's gone up. But let me ask you, I want to get this in. We've only got 30 seconds left, so it's going to have to be fast. Unfunded pension liability. What's your concern there? What's the solution?
Huge problem. And again, the special interests don't want any change because the employer unions, the public employee unions, won't listen to any rational change. And so we're going to have to do some things. We're going to have to probably amend the Constitution to modify this California rule.
It's called the California rule, right?
Yeah, and we're going to have to reach a solution. And you know why we need to do it? The employees, the government employees are the ones that are going to be hurt because the politicians will be long gone and the employees are the ones that are going to lose their fully promised pensions.
Okay, I want to thank you for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. Republican gubernatorial candidate John Cox. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can follow the Maddy Institute by logging onto our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.